The Berlin Wall, that used to separate East from West Berlin, is one of the most iconic Cold War symbols. Over its 30-year-long lifetime, it has served as a location for many events of enormous historical importance. It has shaped the lives of many Germans, and it has played a key factor in the development of the Cold War.
After the Berlin blockade, the city remained under the joint rule of the British, French, Americans, and the Soviets. The economic and political differences were easily seen, and due to these, the Eastern Berliners kept escaping to the west side. In the end, around 1/6 of the German population moved over to the west from the east. The Western Allies had a base within the eastern side of the city, which they used for spying and for propaganda. In 1958, Khrushchev offered a peace treaty which would recognize the two Germanys. It also suggested that Berlin should be completely demilitarized, and if the West didn't agree to this, then the East would take over all of the access to Berlin. This was a dilemma for the West, as they couldn't afford to lose their base in eastern Germany. But they didn't want to not follow the treaty because the war could then become a possibility. Khrushchev's actions were influenced by three things. The first was the fear of West Germany acquiring nuclear weapons. The second was the concern over the failing East German economy. And the final thing that influenced Khrushchev's action was the pressure from Walter Ulbricht, the leader of the GDR. Khrushchev eventually withdrew his treaty, but he wanted to discuss Berlin with the Allies, and so in 1959 they all agreed to meet in Geneva. After Geneva, Khrushchev met with Eisenhower, the US president, but in the end, Berlin was not united. The two sides were going to meet in Paris. However, it was cancelled after the Soviets shot down the U-2 American plane. Khrushchev hoped he would be more lucky with John F. Kennedy, the new president. In June 1961, Walter Ulbricht, the council chairman of the GDR, stated that niemand hat die Absicht, eine Mauer zu errichten. No one has the intention of erecting a wall. This was the first time in history that the term Mauer, or wall, had been used in this context. After a short but sweet telephone call between Nikita Khrushchev and Ulbricht the following month, it was clear that Khrushchev intended to build a wall, and that he was the one who initiated it. However, others say that Khrushchev was originally wary about the construction of a wall, fearing the negative Western reactions, and that it was the Ulbricht that initiated the wall because he feared for the very existence of East Germany. Ulbricht signed the order to construct the wall and to close the border between East and West Berlin in August 1961, when he attended a GDR garden party in Döllinsee, East Berlin. And by midnight, the police and the East German army began to close the border. The following morning, the border with West Berlin was completely closed off. Originally, the wall was just barbed wire, and it stood slightly on the inside of East Berlin, just to ensure that it did not trespass on West Berlin. Later on, it was built into the full-on, proper-scale Mauer. In August, the first parts of the concrete bricks were placed to make the wall. Around the barrier stood tall the armies of the National People's Army, the NVA, and the combat groups of the working class, the KSA. A path of no man's land was installed to allow the soldiers to shoot and fire at anyone who was caught trying to escape Berlin. The Berlin Wall was more than 140 kilometers long, and in June 1962 a second fence just parallel of the original wall was built. A death strip was made, and this was the area in between the two walls. It was covered with materials such as sand that would easily show the footprints of trespassers. Throughout its life, the Berlin Wall evolved through 4 different phases. The first one was the wire fence between the years of 1961 and 1962. Then came along the improved wired fence between 1962 and 1965. The next phase was the concrete wall. This happened between the years of 1965 and 1975, and then, for its final phase, the Grenzmauer, the border wall, 1975 to 1989. The 4th generation wall was the final and for sure the most sophisticated version of the wall ever seen. The construction began in 1975 and was finished by around 1980. It was constructed from different sections of concrete, each around 3.5 meters high and about 1.5 meters wide. It cost the DDM about $3.638 million to build. Eventually, more concrete was added to the wall to stop people driving their cars through the wall, just to escape the horrific Eastern German life. There were, however, many points along the wall which were slightly softer and easier to break. These were strategically placed and allows the Soviets and the Eastern Germans to charge through the wall with their tanks if they ever needed to. It was made more or less impossible to climb over the wall due to the various difficulties placed on the wall, such as barbed wire, fences, bunkers, watchtowers, and of course, the dogs. The Berlin Wall had a tragic effect on both the East and West Berliners. Over the many years, the wall tore families in two, separated loved ones, and caused a time of sadness for the people of Berlin. It was a horrifying experience, not just for the German people, but also for the world. It was a symbol of the Cold War until its tearing down, and it was a representation of Winston Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, which had now become a reality.
Berlin was always the centerpiece of the Cold War, and more often than many remember, very nearly the front line of real combat. In terms of the Cold War, the building of the Berlin Wall had the effect of settling the question of Germany and removing it as a key issue in Cold War negotiations. With the question of Berlin settled, the focus of the Cold War somewhat moved away from Europe. Overall, the wall symbolized the division between East and West Germany. The wall also represented a physical version of the Iron Curtain that Churchill had talked about. 22 months after the erection of the Berlin Wall on June 26, 1963, U.S. President John F. Kennedy visited West Berlin. Speaking from a platform erected on the steps of the Rathaus Schöneberg for an audience of 450,000, he declared in his Ich bin ein Berliner speech the support of the United States for West Germany and for the people of West Berlin in particular.
You live in a defended island of freedom, but your life is part of the main. So let me ask you as I close to lift your eyes beyond the dangers of today to the hopes of tomorrow, beyond the freedom merely of this city of Berlin or your country of Germany, to the advance of freedom everywhere, beyond the wall to the day of peace with justice, beyond yourselves and ourselves to all mankind. Freedom is indivisible. And when one man is enslaved, all are not free. When all are free, then we can look forward to that day when this city will be joined as one, and this country and this great continent of Europe in a peaceful and hopeful globe. When that day finally comes, as it will, the people of West Berlin can take sober satisfaction in the fact that they were in the front lines for almost 2 decades. All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin. And therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner.
Kennedy's message was aimed as much at the Soviets as it was at the Berliners, and was a clear statement of U.S. policy in the wake of the construction of the Berlin Wall. The speech is considered one of Kennedy's best, being both a notable moment during the Cold War and a high point of the new frontier. In 1989, a series of radical political changes occurred in the Eastern Bloc, associated with the liberalization of the Eastern Bloc's authoritarian systems and the erosion of political power in the pro-Soviet governments in nearby Poland and Hungary. After several weeks of civil unrest, the East German government announced on November 9, 1989, that all GDR citizens could visit West Germany and West Berlin. Crowds of East Germans crossed and climbed onto the wall, joined by West Germans on the other side in a celebratory atmosphere. Over the next few weeks, a euphoric public and souvenir hunters chipped away parts of the wall. The governments later used industrial equipment to remove most of the rest. The physical wall itself was primarily destroyed in 1990. The fall of the Berlin Wall paved the way for German reunification, which was formally concluded on October 3, 1990.